What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by two of the best in the business after Game 4 of the Eastern Conference semifinals, Chris Fedor, Jimmy Watkins. We're getting into it after the Cavs lost, and now it's literally winner go home time for the Cavs heading over to Boston for Game 5. Chris, before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about Game 4 and what your takeaways were from today's matchup.
Look, guys, I think the Cavs deserve a ton of credit for the way that they fought, the way that they played. In the absence of Donovan Mitchell, with Caris LeVerts dealing with a knee issue, with Dean Wade basically hobbling on one leg at this point, and with Jared Allen still unavailable to play because of a bruised rib. So for them to be missing everything that they were missing tonight, for them to be at home playing against the Boston Celtics, the best team in the Eastern Conference, perhaps the best team in the entire NBA, and for them to battle the way that they did and fight the way that they did, it just shows the identity of this team. For all the things that you can say about them, for all of the roster flaws, for all of the weaknesses, for all of the maddening inconsistency that they've shown throughout the entire season, which, by the way, has carried over into the playoffs. This is a team that never gives in, never gives up. They rally in the face of adversity. They come together. They take this next man up mentality and they make it so that it's not a simple platitude. It was really, really impressive the way that they battled against the Celtics. It was just a situation, guys, where they didn't have enough to get over the hump. They didn't have enough because coming into the series, their margin for error was so small to begin with against this particular opponent. And then when you don't have Donovan Mitchell, when you're missing Jared Allen, when you're dealing with all the things that the Cavs were dealing with, including an unfavorable whistle that they were really, really pissed about, it just became too much for them to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, I like what Chris said about the identity. This is a team that has dealt with injuries all year, but it's different in the playoffs, man, and it's different when you're missing your top dog. So I thought it was particularly impressive that the Cavs stuck to the resilience and showed the mettle that we've all seen them have without Donovan. I think a lot of people, as soon as that injury report came out, a lot of people, maybe including a few of the Boston Celtics, thought, okay, let's wrap this one up, put a bow on it. The Cavs just came out on fire, hitting a bunch of threes. They knew that's what they had to do to hang in this game. They made 11 in the first half, and they were still down by 5 at halftime, which, again, shows you the size of the task that they were dealing with. But it sounds weird to be talking this way and to be writing the way I think we're all kind of writing after a playoff loss that has you down 3-1 and on the brink of maybe like sweeping or organizational or roster change, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm with Chris. I thought that the performance was really impressive tonight. This was Darius Garland's best game of the playoffs, even if it took him a little ways to get going. Caris LeVerts, playing with a knee injury, still had a big impact on the game, still generated a lot of offense for this team. Max Strus certainly had his best half of the playoffs in that first half, made 5 threes, looked like the guy that the playoff performer that the Cavs paid. Evan Mobley, 19 points. I think that this team kind of reminded people of what they can still do independent of Donovan Mitchell. Like, there's still good pieces here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a lot of different things that we're going to get into during this podcast, but I think we all know we have to start with Darius Garland, someone who has been criticized, scrutinized the entire season because of his play, and obviously we all know that he's dealt with multiple injuries this season and lost weight, psychological impact, also playing the Boston Celtics, the team that he injured himself against. All of these things get taken into account. But the biggest thing, when Donovan Mitchell goes out, Darius Garland said today at shoot around that he understood the responsibility was literally all his. Scoring, passing, communicating on defense. Those were the things that he mentioned before the game had even began to know that he had to make an impact. And like you said, Jimmy, first quarter was not very fair to him. He didn't get going. He had 3 assists, but didn't really do anything scoring wise for the team. And then in the second quarter, he started picking up, and even more so into the second half. It was a game that showed how good Darius Garland can be when he's in that number one role, but also showed that he needs more than just one player, as we've been saying with Donovan Mitchell all season. It's about finding that balance where he can impact games while Donovan's on the court. And like you said, Jimmy, if this is a sweeping roster changing summer, who is available and what they're going to be able to have going forward. Chris, I just wanted to get your thoughts on Darius Garland's performance tonight and what he was able to bring in a situation that called for a lot from him. And the burden is never light, especially when, even if you gave it away for a couple of seasons, the burden for carrying a team is never lighter than when you get it back.
I think there are a couple of things here. I think number one, I think Caris LeVerts said it following the game, and it was a smart point. Sometimes we lose sight of the sacrifice that some of these guys have to make for the betterment of the team. And Darius Garland was one of the guys who was primarily impacted by Donovan Mitchell's arrival a couple of years ago. Before Donovan got here, Darius was the all-star. Before Donovan got here, Darius was the face of the franchise. He was the highest paid player in the organization, still is. He was the driver of the offense. He had basically the keys to the offense and the keys to the franchise. When Donovan came, Darius had to take a step back, and he was willing to do that for the betterment of the team. And he found a way to adapt his game to still be effective for this team while playing alongside Donovan. So that's part of it. Darius was back in the alpha role tonight. He, at various points throughout the course of the season, while Donovan was injured, he was in that same alpha role. And you can tell that there's just a little bit more comfort when Darius has that level of usage, when Darius gets that many shots, when Darius consistently has the ball in his hands. That's part of it. I do think there's truth to that. And Caris brought it up. Everybody has a specific role, and the role is defined by what is best for this team to be successful, not necessarily what's best for the individual to be successful. Yeah, you want to put that individual in advantageous spots. You want to do some things that are going to maximize that individual. You want to play to their strengths of that individual. But it's about how that guy can impact the team and how that guy can impact the winning dynamic. But I think there's another layer to this. And I think this is the thing that can be frustrating when it comes to Darius. Like, yes, those are things that are real. Those are things that Darius has to continue to learn. But if you're going to be a superstar, if you're going to be one of the best players in the NBA at your position, the way that Darius views himself, the way that Darius wants to be characterized, one, you have to learn how to play with star players and still be a star in your role yourself. Two, you have to play with a level of consistency. There can't be these sporadic play styles. There can't be these sporadic box scores. There has to be a level of consistency. That's something that I think separated Darius throughout this entire season from a lot of these other younger point guards that surpassed him. And that's not entirely because he was playing alongside Donovan Mitchell. That's not entirely because he's the second banana in this offense. It's because Darius was just inconsistent this year. And I think his style of play lends itself to a little bit too much inconsistency that can be highlighted in a post-game situation or in a postseason situation against a team the caliber of the Celtics. So it's like, on one hand, I do think Darius capitalized on an opportunity tonight. On the other hand, like, there's not enough holding him back from doing this kind of stuff and impacting the game in such a positive way when Donovan is also out there. And if we're being honest, in the first 3 games of this series, Darius wasn't good enough. Was that because he was sharing the court with Donovan and he didn't have enough opportunities? Or did he just play poorly? So I don't know that we can make the definitive conclusion that tonight shows what Darius can be without Donovan. Because he also did some of these things when Donovan was out there during the regular season. It just hasn't been to the consistent level that is required when you want to be a star type player.
Yeah, being a superstar is not a sometimes thing. Being a star is not a sometimes thing. Like, you earn that label over the course of years. You have to kind of always be proving yourself if you want that kind of label, and you have to be proving yourself in all different kinds of contexts and matchups and on-court pairings, right? Like, there's no basketball player good enough to win on their own without another co-star. Like, the NBA, all the NBA's best teams are built on star pairings. We've kind of gotten away from big threes, but like all of the Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray,
Kyrie,
Anthony
Luka.
Edwards, Kyrie and Luka, Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns kind of playing like a spaz right now, but like at his best, he is the co-star to Ant. All these great teams that are still up in the playoffs, you have to have a co-star, you have to have a running mate, which means you have to know how to coexist with them. And I want to give Darius a ton of grace for the adjustment, and not just grace, credit for the adjustment that it required for him to kind of, shift the controls to Donovan, to cede control of the offense that was his for 3 years before Donovan got here. At the same time, we've always seen hints of it, and sometimes they've made it work. I think part of it is honestly the weird kind of season that everyone had this year. Darius is in and out, Donovan's in and out, Jarrett's in and out now. Evan was in and out during the regular season. That did not help, obviously, when the Cavs are trying to find their stride with not one but 2 kind of conceptually clunky pairings of players. Darius and Donovan both want to be the driver of the car on offense. Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, 2 non-shooting bigs. How do you make that work spacing wise? Didn't have enough time to make that, to figure out all of the idiosyncrasies during the regular season. I think that's another takeaway from this game. Donovan didn't play, and that's kind of a theme of the season, is who's here, who's available, who's not. And as a result, what could have been. Chris asked the question to Caris, the last question of the presser tonight, like, have you guys considered what this series could look like if everyone was healthy and you guys could give Boston your best shot? Obviously, they're not going to acknowledge that question right now, but yeah, of course they are. Of course they're thinking that. Of course Caris LeVert's like, man, I wish my knee wasn't bugging me. Man, I wish we had Donovan. I wish Jared Allen could raise his arms, much less play basketball. All of that stuff. They're all thinking about that. Darius Garland, if he doesn't break his jaw, how much different does his season go? I don't know. But I think there's a thin line between an excuse and a reason, and I think some of the Cavs' injury excuses are actually reasons. At the same time, you kind of got to work with what you got. Like, nobody has a perfect situation. Like the Celtics, while they're still incredible, like, they don't have Kristaps Porzingis right now, and they're clearly a different team without him. Like, the way the Cavs attacked them in the paint during Game 2, like, it's a different thing having Al Horford and Luke Cornett as your defensive anchors than it is about having Kristaps Porzingis, who can, is fleet-footed enough to switch with everyone and can be a great rim protector at the rim. So nobody has a perfect context, and no team is going to be 100% healthy this time of year. So sometimes you just got to figure it out. And I think that that's probably the knock against Darius Garland right now, is that he has not figured it out consistently enough.
I think the other thing from tonight is that Darius probably got the best perspective of how hard it is to play when you're not getting help, because he didn't really get a whole lot of help in that second half. 33 of the 45 points that the Cavs scored in the second half were from either Darius Garland or Evan Mobley. And Evan Mobley had 10 of his 19 points in the third quarter. Darius Garland had 19 points in the second half altogether. So, like, I think that'll be a positive going forward if they continue to have this backcourt, because Darius is now like, oh, I realize how much you need me to take these shots and make these shots and whatever, because I was in that situation when you were watching me and screaming at me. And there was a point, and we're going to get to Evan Mobley in a second, but there was a point in the game where Darius Garland picked up his second foul and was heading to the bench because Sam Merrill was about to check in for him. And Donovan was in the middle of having like a minor argument with one of the coaches on behind the bench, trying to argue to keep Darius in the game in the first half, because was he not scoring? Sure. But was he able to facilitate and get spacing for the guys that needed it? Yes. So Donovan argued to keep Darius in the game. Darius stayed in the game and then proceeded to get more assists in that first half. And I think that's not only an example of how much Donovan Mitchell trusts and understands how much Darius means to this organization and to this team, but also just what Donovan does for Darius. I don't think that Darius takes the step that we think he needs to, because we understand that he needs a second star player next to him to be on a good team, to create a good team. If it's not someone like Donovan Mitchell, who breathes life into his game even when he's not on the floor. But with that being said, Darius needed more help. The Cavs tried to give it to him in the first half with their shooting. Max Strus got off to a great start, 5 threes in the first quarter, and then didn't hit anything for the rest of the game. And I just wanted to, what did you guys see about their shooting in tonight's game? Because the first half, they clearly were doing whatever they wanted on offense, getting open looks and creating beyond the arc. But in the second half, shots just weren't falling again. Was there a different scheme that you saw the Celtics implement, or do you think the shots just weren't falling for them again?
I think a big thing had to do with the turnovers of the Celtics. A lot of the turnovers of the Celtics early on in the game in the first half were live ball turnovers. They were careless decisions. They were bad passes that fueled the Cavs transition game, and they got a few opportunities for Max Strus in transition. And multiple of those threes led to Joe Mazzulla taking time out and screaming at his team. So I do think it's easier for the Cavs to execute and get quality threes when they're playing faster, when they can attack against a non-set Boston defense. And Boston committed 10 turnovers in the first half. In the third quarter, they had 1. It's hard to continue to generate the quality looks that the Cavs were able to generate in the first half when they aren't getting out in the fast break, when they aren't getting out in transition, when they aren't turning those turnovers into positive offense. The other thing is, obviously, Boston was a little bit more aware of it, and Boston had a greater attention to detail. They had a greater focus when it came to finding Max Strus, finding the shooters, not going under screens nearly as much. They still went under at times. Cornette was still dropping. Horford was still dropping. And I thought Darius took advantage of that, especially in the fourth quarter. But it's a little bit different for Darius than it is when it comes to Max Strus. Like, His threes need to come into the flow of the offense. His threes need to come in transition. His threes need to come based on play calls and sets and stuff. It's not like he can just go ISO, crossover, step into a three the way that Darius can. So I do think that the Cavs offense was a little bit worse in the second half in terms of the pace that they played at, in terms of the quality of shots that they were able to generate. I also think part of that had to do with the Celtics taking care of the ball and some adjustments that the Celtics made in terms of just not giving up those same kinds of open looks to certain personnel, right? If Evan Mobley is going to take them, fine. If Isaac Okoro is going to take them, fine. Even Dean Wade at times, fine. But we're just not going to let Max Strus get the same quality looks. We're not going to let Sam Merrill get loose the way that he was able to in the first half. So some of that comes down to execution too, right?
Yeah, I mean, what Chris said about the way Darius gets his shots is a lot different than the rest of the other guys. It's different for basically everyone else except for Caris LeVert can create those kinds of shots, but he's not hitting them at the same clip. Caris LeVert has been kind of searching for the long ball all season. He shot 32% from three during the regular season, and in the playoffs, he's sort of waxed and waned overall. So it's just really hard when you only have one reliable creator out there. And I also think there's an element, particularly without Donovan, there's an element of Celtics versus Celtics happening here. Like I said earlier, I think Boston saw the injury report and kind of like relaxed their shoulders a little bit to start the game. The Cavs came out through a punch. Boston sort of woke up as I don't think that Boston played particularly well for long stretches at any points of this game. They just, can I just say real quick, as like just from a basketball enjoyment perspective, forget the players, forget the team. It's not a rivalry thing, anything like that. I just don't like the Celtics. Like the way their process bothers me. They have all of this talent. Their peaks offensively are so high. They play capital T, capital B, capital G, the beautiful game sometimes. Drive, kick, quick decisions, balls moving. Defense has no chance if they play that way. And then they'll just do this like, all right, Jason Tatum's going to catch the ball 16 feet from the basket on the wing, and he's going to pivot for a little bit. He's going to take a pull-up jumper over somebody, and if it goes in, it goes in. We kind of have to let him take those shots because he's Jason Tatum, but it's just why you do that? Why? It doesn't make any sense. They are such a frustrating team to watch sometimes, and there was a little bit of that going on out there tonight as well.
Yeah, I mean, me and Jimmy were talking about it. A particular play when Jason Tatum was bringing the ball up and Peyton Pritchard was running down the sideline, side of the court with his hands flailing like, I'm wide open. And Jason Tatum just gives him one of these. And it's like, I'm going to just bring it down real slow, and I'm going to go into my back down and dribble, fade away, pull up. I'm like, and I think he made it, and Peyton was like, okay, well, if you're going to make it, you can do that. But yeah, and I wanted...
This is why it feels like to me, if the Cavs were going to make this a real series, if they were going to extend this series, it had to be tonight. It's not just because they were playing at home, but because there was the natural letdown that was probably going to occur with the Celtics the minute that they saw Donovan Mitchell was not going to play. And you saw it early on in the game with the Celtics. The Cavs raced out nice and early. Dream start, 8-2. Celtics throwing the ball all over the place. Jump passes, live turnovers, not getting back in transition, lazy closeouts. All of those kinds of things were happening to the Celtics early on because they have a tendency to overlook lesser opponents. They have a tendency to lean on their talent, to lean on their greatness, and think they don't have to always do the little things. They don't have to always have the focus and the attention to detail. All of the things that they showed in game 3 when they felt like it was a more important game for them, where they had a more business-like approach to the game. You don't always see that with the Celtics, and usually some variable comes into play that aids that slippage from Boston. And tonight, it was the fact that Donovan wasn't going to be playing. So I felt like if the Cavs were going to get one because they were at home, because the Celtics were going to Celtic early on in the game, and because the Cavs made so many threes to start the game, like the formula was there. The blueprint was there to pull off an upset. And Boston, at times, continued to let the Cavs hang around and let the Cavs hang around, and the crowd got into it. And the Cavs started making a run in the fourth quarter, and they put the pressure on Boston. And when they get into close games, sometimes their shot selection isn't so great. Sometimes their guys try to go one-on-one, and all that kind of stuff was playing out. But the Cavs still weren't able to get it. So on a night that they only turned the ball over 8 times, on a night that they made 15 threes, on a night that Darius had 30, and they played well in the absence, 4 stretches, in the absence of Donovan Mitchell. And the Celtics did not play with the same focus and intensity that they're going to play with in Game 5. Like, now they know Donovan's probably not going to be out there. There's not going to be the same natural letdown that there was the first time that it happens. So it felt like, to me, if the Cavs were going to get a game to extend this series, it needed to be tonight. And they didn't. And I think it ends Wednesday night.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys called it. You guys said Cavs or Celtics in 5. But I wanted to get into what this Cavs team is currently dealing with and who has been able to have success even with those things. Like Evan Mobley tonight, again, could not get it going in the first half. He had 5 points. One of those shots that he made came off of a three-pointer that was wide open because everybody just looked at him and said, "You're really going to shoot this?" And then he had a little dunk. So 5 points in the first half. Then he had 10 points in the third quarter. Then he had 4 points in the fourth quarter. It feels like there's always, in each game of this series, there's been a quarter of each game where Evan Mobley has shown that he can compete with this team. And most of the time it's been in the fourth quarter when things are kind of dwindling down for the Celtics and they don't really need to worry about it too much. But today it was in the third quarter. Did you guys see something different from Evan today in the third quarter that he can replicate? Or is it just he had an advantageous matchup or was hunting switches as he has been saying? Jimmy, I'll let you handle this one first.
Yeah, I mean, I think that where Evan's at in his offensive development right now, that's kind of the mode you want him to be in. Is you're going to throw him the ball when he has an advantageous matchup, and you hope he takes advantage of it, as he did. And he's done a pretty good job of that throughout this series and in large stretches of the Orlando series, I think. And the next step is adding a little bit more to that. Maybe being able to, expect a 10-point quarter out of him every night, every other night, and maybe it's a little bit less matchup dependent. But I don't think even like this idealized version of Evan Mobley that I think frustrated Cavs fans build up to be, like, frustrated Cavs fans make it sound like Evan Mobley was supposed to be the perfect basketball player in every shape or form, when I think while some of the comparisons for him were bold, I'm talking like Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, even those guys had imperfections on offense. Like Tim Duncan's calling card as a basketball player was defense first, defense and culture. Kevin Garnett, one of the best defensive players of his generation. He also happened to have a absolute cash money pull up mid range once he developed, and he was a freak athlete. Had a great face up game. Tim Duncan had a great face up game, great bank shots. Evan Mobley has the defense part down. We're still waiting on the final touches, the tweaks, the skill parts of his offensive game to come around. Like, I think if this is who Evan Mobley ends up being this offensively, 19, 20-ish points per game, the Cavs would consider that a huge win for his development as an offensive player ultimately. I just think that it's kind of like we talked about this a little bit with Darius too, like development isn't linear, and if you show too much early in your career, people expect even more. It's never enough. And so Evan Mobley's on the right track. I really think he is. This playoffs have been really important for his offensive development, but there's still a cap on his offensive ceiling.
I also think sometimes guys play bad. Whether it's for a stretch in a game, whether it's for a quarter, or whether it's from game 2 to game 3. These guys are human. The amount of guys in the NBA that play great consistently every single quarter or every single game, I mean, that's reserved for guys like Luka and Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid and MVP candidate and LeBron James and those kinds of guys. Evan isn't that. He's a 22-year-old kid who's in the postseason for the second time in his career. He's a 22-year-old kid who is still developing on the offensive end of the floor while at the same time being one of the most impactful defensive players in the entire NBA. We can't lose sight of those things. So this idea that Evan has to be great every single second that he's on the floor or every single quarter that he plays, basketball doesn't work like that. Sometimes he's going to have a great start and he's going to fizzle out. Sometimes he's going to have a terrible start and he's going to pick it up in the second half. It's also a little bit tougher, I think, in this offense for a big guy like Evan because he needs Darius to get him involved. He needs Caris to get him involved. He needs to run a two-man game with Max Strus where the defense kind of goes more towards Max. They leave Evan a little bit. They're not able to help off the corners, and that allows Evan to get a layup inside, an alley-oop, better position inside, where he doesn't have to work as hard for his offense. And to me, like if there was any change, that's what stood out in the second half. The places where Evan was catching the ball and initiating offense and going to work in the post, it was very, very close to the rim. It wasn't him having to take a couple of dribbles back down a guy and get to his baby hook over size or something along those lines. He was catching the ball so close to the basket. He made a quick decision and he was able to power over whoever it was, or sometimes power through Drew Holiday the way that he did. But it's like, there's going to be a level of inconsistency with Evan's offense at this stage of his career, at this stage of his development. You just have to live with those things. And I think if we're being honest, since Jarrett Allen went down, and he hasn't played since Game 4, the first round against Orlando, since Jarrett went down, Evan has acquitted himself very well at the center spot. And look, Wendell Carter Jr. is not Joel Embiid. We understand that. And Al Horford he's got some issues. At this stage of his career, he doesn't have the foot speed to keep up on the perimeter. He's not making shots for the Celtics. And Luke Cornett is, for a championship level team, usually like the 11th guy in the rotation. So it's not like Evan has had to go against a gauntlet of players here in the postseason. But he can't control that. And he stepped into the center spot. I think a position where some people were wondering, hey, is he ready for that position full time? Is he physically mature enough? Is he strong enough? Is he somebody that plays with the requisite intensity to play that position for 82 games in a regular season. And this has just been a short sample, and this doesn't mean that there's a definitive conclusion, but I would think if you're the Cavs front office, you feel better about moving forward with Evan Mobley at the 5, the way that he's acquitted himself, the way that he has been able to anchor the paint and be the last line of defense as opposed to the weak side helper. All of these different things that I think it's not what the Cavs intended to find out, but I think all these different things that Evan has shown since Jarrett has been out informs their decision-making a little bit more when it comes to the future of Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley together and whether it's time to transition Evan to the full-time 5.
Real quick to Chris's point about Evan Mobley being dependent on others to help get him involved. That's true of even some of the best big men of all time, right? Like Shaq needed someone to throw him the ball. Karl Malone needed to run pick and roll with John Stockton.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the nature of being a big man. It's a perimeter oriented game. It's more perimeter oriented than ever now. And as a result, we have sort of outliers like Joel Embiid, who's huge and can do some of the guard stuff. Nikola Jokic, huge and can do some of the guard stuff. But that's not just par for the course because Evan Mobley's 22 years old and in his second playoff run. That's par for the course because of the position that he plays.
Mm-hmm. And I also think that's why from the very beginning, guys, I have talked about when it comes to evaluating Evan, it's about impact, not production, because so much of production is tied to opportunity.
And I just wanted to touch on this really quickly because the whole team really talked about it. Can we admit that the referees were bad tonight? 24 versus 7 on attempts from the free throw line. 5 of those were actual free throw attempts for the Cavs, because 2 of them were based on technicals. So those were basically given to them. I mean, I don't really want to harp on this too much, but I just wanted to get both of your perspectives on this. They were bad. It wasn't just me, right?
I think the most troubling thing about it was it seemed like one team was allowed to do certain things on the defensive end of the floor, and the other one wasn't as much.
I would say, again, I think we've had this conversation before. Who are we expecting to draw fouls? Darius Garland, not a high free throw rate guy. Caris LeVerts, waxes and wanes. Evan Mobley, again, he maybe you could argue that Darius and Caris deserve a few more. I think Caris was the one who was talking about. He knows, or was it Darius? I don't know. One of those talking about. I know I'm getting hit. I know my teammates are getting
Darius
hit.
said that.
I'm sure that's happening. But I think the biggest reason that the Celtics shot more free throws, one, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown are bigger perimeter-oriented players. They are guys who have a track record of drawing a ton of free throw attempts. Two, they just have a wider range of guys who draw fouls. Drew Holiday's a big guy, didn't shoot any free throw attempts tonight, but they have more sources of high volume free throw attempt guys. Where again, if it's not Darius or Caris, Max Strus, Isaac Okoro, Dean Wade, Sam Merrill, these are just not guys who drive a lot.
All right. Last question of today's podcast, and this is just to Chris, because I know you had this conversation with Dean and have more insight on that end because you wrote about it for cleveland.com today. Dean Wade, we've talked about him playing on this knee, coming back and trying not to come back too early, but he said today that there were some tears and some stuff in there, and he said some TLC fixed it up. I don't know what he's trying to allude to, and even talked about that in the off season that it's not out of the question that he gets surgery. What is all the information that you are gathering from that situation and what could potentially happen in the offseason?
I think we have to start here. By definition, a significant sprain is a tear of some kind. So that's not all that surprising. It was a little surprising how flippant he was when he said it. He was like, yeah, there are a couple tears in there or something like that. But there were points when people inside this organization did not think Dean Wade would be back this year. There were points when people close to Dean did not believe that he was going to be back this year, that the injury was too significant. There was too long of a rehab process in front of him. He wasn't making the kind of progress that people wanted. It was a slow recovery. The clock was ticking. The playoffs were getting closer, all that kind of stuff. But from what I know is he attacked the rehab relentlessly. He even said it earlier today that he pushed himself physically more than he ever has before. And he is giving the Cavs everything that he has. And it's probably more than what the Cavs thought he would give at this point. They're certainly extending his minutes in the first couple of games more than they initially planned to. If you go back to game 3, I was told that the plan was to keep him between like 6 and 10 minutes. Didn't happen. Coming into tonight's game, I was told the minute restriction was about 18 to 20. Didn't happen. They need him too much. They understand, and Dean understands how he can be effective in this particular series. He has the switchability, he has the size, he has the length, he has the strength, he has the foot speed, and he doesn't have the same lateral quicks at this point in time. He is not moving the same kind of way that he did at various points in the regular season, but he is giving this organization everything that he has. And this is why he fought so hard during the rehab process. This is why he attacked it so much, because he wanted to play in the playoffs, because he wanted the feeling of game 3 on Saturday night when he got a standing ovation for the first time in his career. And the building just went absolutely bananas when he made the first 3. And because, he didn't play well in last year's playoffs, and he got basically yanked out of the rotation because JB Bickerstaff lost so much faith in him. But given the year that he had, the bounce back year, he wanted an opportunity for this. Play against the Celtics. See if you can impact the series. And I give him a lot of credit for playing on this, because everything that I'm told is that there is going to be a long conversation following this season about what the next steps are for Dean. Surgery has not been decided. Let me put it that way. It has not been decided that it is necessary, but it is something that both sides are kicking around, and it is something that is considered a possibility.
All right, so we got to wrap up, because I know I got to pack. Chris probably got to pack, and we got stuff to do before this. But
there's one more thing, though, before we go. I walked out of the arena with Donovan Mitchell, and him and I had a conversation about his calf injury, about how it happened, and about what the concern level is. And everything in my conversation with Donovan pointed to a guy who will not be playing in Game 5. At the very least, his status is very much in doubt, because it's not about a calf injury. It's about a calf injury that can quickly become an Achilles if you push it too much too soon.
And that is why you listen to the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. Game 5 on Wednesday. The Cavs look to become the 14th team in NBA playoffs history to come back from a 3-1 playoff lead or deficit. And, it starts with one game at a time. What did the Celtics say last year? Don't let us get one. Well, the Cavs already have one, so we're working with a better situation. But with that all being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember, to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. Find out for certain when Donovan Mitchell is declared out or if he is available for Game 5. And then, to do so, you can sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We'll see you in Boston.